computer. All right, we are recording. So,
Yay.
Hey everybody. Welcome to week 2, I believe is what we're in. We're talking about self-care. And I have with us Sally Sheppard. Sally is a good friend of mine. She is also the executive director of the Cottage. So Sally, I want to turn it over to you a little bit to talk about, Sally's also at LCSW, who graduated from UGA and works as a faculty liaison and field instructor as well. So works with students at UGA as well. But I wanted to let Sally tell us a little bit about the work that she's done in the field. So Sally, if you want to kind of navigate us through your career pathway.
Yeah, sure. So after I got my graduate degree, I was young after I got my graduate degree. I think I was 25 or something. So went back to school so that I could do direct service with survivors of child abuse and sexual assault from my job I had before I went back to school, which was working at the district attorney's office with victims of child abuse and sexual assault. And so when I got my graduate degree, I was lucky that I had a job waiting for me after I graduated. All that was through networking. So network, and started doing therapy with kids who had been sexually abused. And in graduate school, that was like the sexy thing to do, to be a therapist. But then I realized I don't like ongoing relationships with clients. And I don't really like children that much if they're not my kids, or like I want to discipline kids when I'm around them. So I realized I didn't like doing therapy. And so I'm more of a crisis work social worker when I was doing direct service. So I was trained to do forensic interviews of kids when there were allegations of abuse. And so I got that training in my first year right out of grad school, worked for a children's advocacy center, and was so lucky that I was able to do that. And so I'm more of a person who responds to trauma right after the disclosure of abuse and kind of puts all the puzzle pieces together at that moment in time, and then hands it off to someone else for case management. And I did that for about 4 years and interviewed over 1,000 kids. I would say that I practiced very bad self-care at that time. When I was in grad school, it was years 2001 to 2003. And believe it or not, there was hardly any mentioning of self-care at all. Back then, we were just told, like, brainwashed to, change the world and our personal selves be damned. So I really embraced that and worked really hard, but also it was detrimental to my physical and mental well-being for sure, and other relationships around me, and just kept trudging through and slowly found my own way of self-care. At that time, did the best I could. Like, there's self-care and then there's like negative coping mechanisms. So I harbored on negative coping mechanisms for a long time. And then did that for about 4 years, like did that direct service job with kids for about 4 years. And then the position of the executive director of the Cottage came open in 2007. And I got really competitive to get that job and got that job. And even though my leanings and my training had all been in direct service work, I really am an organized person and really drawn to not working with clients nowadays, for sure. I don't want to work with a client, honestly, nowadays. And I'm more big picture, how am I going to run this organization, giving staff, personalities, clients, agency partners, policy, funding, all that stuff. So I do that now. It's a different level of stress than the direct service stuff. It's not so much personal stories that impact a person who's in nonprofit management. It's more of the systems and how they can stress you out, and then the environment. And I don't mean like our beautiful storms we're having today. I mean like the environment, the political environment, the social environment. COVID has impacted it greatly. I've seen 3 administrations, meaning like presidents, come through, different governors, where everybody's leaning locally, whatever. That impacts our funding, impacts how we're able to do our services, agency partners. So things like that are the levels of stress that I deal with now.
So let me ask you a couple of questions about some things you said before we move forward. You talked about being a crisis social worker and coming in, in a crisis and doing the initial assessment and evaluation. How often did you find out what happened to those children you interviewed after you handed them off? Was there?
Very often. Okay. Very often. I would say probably 80% of the time we had a disclosure of abuse. So do you mean like what happened to them after? Like, did I follow up?
Yes. Yeah.
No,
No.
I did not. I have this unique ability, and that's why I think crisis work works well for me. I don't care what happens next.
Yeah.
Like that was a way of me coping was I knew that the only thing I could control was if that kid was able to disclose to me at that time, and then could I advocate for the person who did the bad thing to either be arrested or for the kid to have therapy.
Yep.
And luckily I worked at an agency where therapy was the next step, and it was free and it was available to everybody. So I didn't so much have to worry about what happens next. It did bother me sometimes, and it still does, when parents are not supportive of their children when they've been abused, and they are the person who hinders that child's healing process. That absolutely bothers me now, but I think I've put a pretty good wall up on that. So I know that that's out of my control. I can just offer options, and then people have self-determination to what they're going to do with what happened.
Right. But that was something you kind of learned how to do after
Yes.
years, in the
Mhm.
field and experiencing that and figuring out how to keep that separate. And then you talked a little bit about how the pressures are different when you're the leader of an organization, which I also understand as in a leadership role with an organization. It is very different than working with clients. And like you said, a lot of times it's not the personal stories, it's the systems. But one of the things that I think we still do take personally is staff and the people who do the work and making decisions that are good for our teams and all of the various pressures that they're dealing with. And then the things they don't see, when you're trying to balance the budget and figure out what roles stay and what roles maybe don't stay, and making all of the pieces work. I think that's really hard. And I know you have a small team who are doing trauma work. How much do you see with them carrying that trauma with them, or secondary trauma, or maybe we should even just talk first about what is secondary trauma and how would you define that?
Well, secondary trauma to me is just like the rubbing off of people's trauma onto you. You can't help but take on some of that as you work with and share space and have a connection with someone who is sharing their story with you. And so times that we've easily felt secondary trauma is when someone you love has gone through something and they share that experience with you, and you have emotions because someone you love has gone through something. So when people do crisis work, especially in social work, what we do with child abuse and sexual assault, we can't help but have a connection with that person in some way. And then so their story stays with us a little bit. I have a lot of thoughts about empathy versus compassion. I think empathy is maybe nice for people you love, but as we do work with survivors or with those who are impacted by trauma for our job, then we should work from a place of compassion, not so much empathy, because empathy you carry with you and you kind of take on that struggle or that trauma that person is going through in a way so that you can share space with them. Compassion is knowing that is happening to them, and you are here to provide them services and options and support, but it is not your struggle. And
that's,
so I think
that's
that
really
that's
interesting, because we do hear a lot about developing empathetic listening skills and how to be an empathetic practitioner. But from your experience, you're saying you feel like it's better to have a lot of compassion and work from a compassionate place. But
and that's been an evolution, Carrie, because when I was in school, before I was in school, I have sympathy for that person. We know sympathy is not what we want to have. And then it evolved to empathy. And just now I've started hearing more about empathy is what makes you have burnout. Empathy is what makes you develop bad boundaries between you and that person, because you feel so connected to them. I have empathy for my friend who's experiencing a loss of a parent. But I do not need to have empathy for a client who has experienced sexual assault. I have compassion for their situation. I would do what is on my job description to offer them services, but I'm not going to think about them outside of work. Does that make sense? And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
But if you come to it from that place, then you'll have more longevity in your job, but you'll do better work with that person too. Because I always like to express to my staff, interns, students that I have as well, is this is their trauma. This is their struggle. And you can't take on, like they might have, I mean, people have multiple traumas, I get it, but you might hear of 20 in 1 week. They have experienced one. And so that secondary trauma of hearing 20 stories in 1 week is a lot different than the person who has experienced that trauma. And so we need to put a boundary there, or else we're going to be like, oh my God, trauma, 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 trauma. And then
Right.
how are you able to function every day when that's what you do every day? You know, how are you supposed to be happy? You know?
Right. Well, and it's also a little bit like, as you know, I was trying to think of the term for it. It just left my head when you're taking someone's culture.
Mhm. Cultural appropriation.
Appropriations. It's a little bit like
Mhm.
trauma appropriation.
Yeah.
If you're
That's a good word.
if
Yeah.
you're taking their, their
Mhm.
trauma
Mhm.
onto you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when I think of my staff and your original question of like, how does your staff work with this? So vicarious trauma is similar to secondary trauma. It's just like what you do, you feel it, blah, blah, blah. I think secondary trauma to me feels more like something where if my mother was sexually assaulted, like someone extremely close to me, then I would feel secondary trauma. Like I'm with her through that as much as I can be with her as she goes to the hospital, wish her as she cries about it at night, blah, blah, blah. Vicarious trauma is where I'm feeling that as someone that this is my job. So vicarious trauma is going to happen. Like it's going to happen. There's no way to get around it. You're absolutely going to be traumatized by purposefully putting yourself to listen to other people's stories, offer them support, whatever, because of child abuse and sexual assault. So you need to put things in place to help you work through that vicarious trauma.
Right.
But you also need to be aware enough of when it is impacting you. And that is also self-care.
Yep.
So we do a lot of stuff. I mean, it's just such an evolved staff nowadays. Since I was not good at this when I started being an executive director, but I've been there 15 years. And so we do a lot of stuff. And like we have conversations about how is that impacting you? Like when I know that my staff has listened to a horrible interview, like a child has disclosed a especially horrible situation that day, I say to them, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Like, what are you doing tonight? I'm not like, we'll pack it up, we'll see you tomorrow, like right. We're literally doing that. And it's not just me, because I don't know everything that's going on.
Yeah.
It's the culture of that within our agency of making that a priority and taking time off. When you're like, we had a staff person that saw a lot of rape victims in a small amount of time. And I was like, you get 2 extra days paid off. Like you're taking that today. You need to leave. And don't you dare open that laptop. Like don't you dare answer an email, text, whatever. So we are purposely doing that and have an intention with that and kind of check up on each other, because I think that we know each other well enough that we can smell when something's up. But yet there's self-determination there as well. Like yep. I can't make you take care of yourself, but I can put things in place, create a culture where we also take care of ourselves. So.
Yeah. And I think probably these students that I'm going to share this recording with, have more experience with this and feel this more than others. They're they're part of the part-time cohort. Part-time online cohort. So they are in the field working,
doing the work,
and then doing these internships part-time on top of their full-time jobs. A lot of them,
right? So
that adds another layer for these students in particular of balancing school and work and children. To all of them.
And I like everybody else balance a lot of stuff as well. And I have changed how I thought. Like I used to think, balance is everything has a piece of the pie, like everybody gets a quarter. Now it's not. I've flushed that down the toilet. Balancing is riding the wave of my kids are sick, so I'm all about kids, or my kids can't go to school because of COVID. I'm all about my kids right now. Work is back burner for a second. I know we're getting the bills, we're doing our job, blah, blah, blah. I can chill on that. You know what I'm saying? Or my parent having a surgery. I'm all about my mom right now. So balancing is riding the wave. Or I'm like, I'm not feeling right. Like I'm off. I'm going to lock myself in my room and be like, you guys take care of yourself for a little bit. Mommy needs some time, or I get a paid day off now, so that balancing is riding the wave. It's not giving everybody equal share.
Right. The whole equity, not equality kind of thing. So, so paying attention to what needs the most attention at that moment and balancing with everything else. Yeah. So when you think about self-care, what are some things that you would recommend for self-care activities for yourself or for your staff or for your interns? What do you typically find helpful or needed for social workers?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned this because I'm teaching that class and I just was reading some of the articles I have to give these students to read. And one of them really focuses on personal self-care and versus professional self-care and how you need to take both into account. So personal self-care is what you should have been doing in the first place. And that is like, oh, it's important for me to take vitamins and it's important for me to go on walks and things like that. So that's some of that self-care piece of knowing what is important to me. And I think I know self-care is very individualistic as well. Yep. Like some people say, well, you need to go to therapy. Well, therapy isn't the thing for everybody. Or I do yoga or I do meditation retreats or, whatever. I go on trips all the time and just completely decompress. Or I turn off my phone. It's not the same thing for everybody. You have to be purposeful and intentional to find what works for you. And so you could take, ask your best friend, ask others in your cohort, your partner, whatever, and figure out what they do and what might try those things and see if it works for you. I know that there are some amazing self-care folks you can follow on, because I do Instagram, and so I'm doing all sorts of self-care. And if it's stupid, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna unfollow them. But then there's a few where I'm like, oh, this speaks to me. So you have to do some work and figure out what works for you in personal self-care. Professional self-care is knowing when you are being asked to do too much with too little training and too little resources, and then advocating for yourself. Professional self-care is knowing what makes you happy. Professional self-care is not taking the first job that's offered to you because you just want to get a job. It's being for me, I need to have an office. I need to have a office that is hopefully painted nicely, that has pleasing aesthetics. That's when you're going to get the best work from me. Don't put me in the basement or don't make me work from home. So you need to also be thoughtful about yourself, about what works for you professionally. For some people, I don't need a whole lot of supervision. I don't even need a whole lot of gratitude. But every once in a while is nice. Yes. I'm surprised when it happens. I'm like, somebody's saying they appreciate me. Okay. But I have supervised people who need to have a weekly check-in. They need to have supervision. They need to have words of affirmation, things like that. So figure out what works for you, and then you need to tell somebody. And that's how you get your professional self-care taken care of.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, it is kind of like figuring out your love language and then applying it to your job.
Absolutely. We actually did a training for that in work. And
did you?
We all had written, I know who needs words of affirmation. I know I need to slip them a thank you note. I know who, likes the little, something bought and put on their desk. And then I know the ones that don't care, they just want time off or whatever. So
right. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that my supervisor has done for me fairly recently, because he knows I hate saying no to things. If he gives me a new project or a new grant, I will almost always say yes. I am not good at saying no. And I'm working on that for myself in a lot of different ways. But one of the things that he's done that's helped me is he says, okay, you can say yes, but it comes with yes, and this is what I need to make it happen.
That's awesome.
And he's like, and if the list,
everybody did that. Yeah.
And he's like, and if the list is too long or we don't have the resources for it, then we're going to have to figure out a different way to do it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So
I'm going to borrow that.
Sure. And it's been really great because I if I get all right, we need you to lead this project, or do you have capacity to do this? I can say yes. And I need, a coordinator to help me with this piece, or I'm going to need, a project manager to help with this, or, pull in some case managers for these teams. And then he and the other senior director that can decide if they want to give me those resources to lead that project or not. So, so then I feel better because I haven't just said no. But I need to get okay with saying no too. But this is kind of a baby step that direction.
Right. That's great. I love that.
So, and I think it just helps the whole team to kind of assess where are we, what resources we have, and what could we, put where, kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah. So one of the things I mentioned to you before we jumped on this call, sorry, I got the sniffles a little bit, is self-soothing versus self-care.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
So yeah, this is something that I've seen a lot of articles on recently, probably because I'm paying attention more, where it's categorizing what I would have traditionally thought as self-care activities as
Mhm.
self-soothing activities. So things like taking a bubble bath or having a coffee date with a friend or a face mask or,
Mhm.
getting a manicure. And then self, so the analogy is that it's like, putting a Band-Aid on a sprained ankle kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then self-care are things like going to therapy or meditating
Mhm.
or actually taking
Mhm.
control of your finances. Anyway, so what's your first reaction to that? As I guess I'll start there. So
Well, when you first mentioned it to me, I thought, well, that sounds right. That is a self-soothing thing. Some of those things could be, absolutely. But then I think of, like, for me putting on a face mask is not that big of a deal. Like, I generally have time to do that. But then I think of a mom, I'm thinking of a mom who has a lot of kids, works 2 jobs, and for her to have the time to put on a face mask and like chill out,
yeah,
like that is probably, my assumption is that could do a big change for her. Whereas we
right.
have people who are like big meditation people and they probably do that all the time. But if I took a whole weekend for myself and only had to worry about myself for a whole weekend, heck yeah, that could be seen as self-soothing, but that would be a big self-care step for me. So I really think it's individual now that I think about it, Carrie.
Yeah.
I really think it's individualistic as to what that means to them. What I don't want us to do is say, ugh, I'm feeling some type of way. I think I'm stressed out more so, or I'm yelling more at my partner, or I'm hitting my cat.
Right.
I'm gonna go get my nails done. That'll fix it.
Right.
Like, I think that it's self-care requires more intention and thought of what works for me, and then freaking doing it.
Yeah.
Like putting yourself enough as a priority, and you should be your top priority. Absolutely, because if you are, then everything else falls into place. So if you're like, ugh, I'm off, I'm not 100% today, or I'm 60% today, I am
Right.
off. So taking the time to go, ugh, I need to do something here. Like I'm not functioning on full capacity here. And then like literally going and taking care of yourself. But it takes time and attention, and not flying through life 100 miles an hour and thinking, well, I said I would do that project, or I said I would get these clothes all folded. I must do this tonight,
Right.
Um, so that's, I don't know if that really answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting to see it broken down that way.
Mhm.
To me, and like I said, I've seen it in a couple articles recently where self-care must be activities that strengthen you, and
Mhm.
self-soothing are more activities that just make you feel a little bit better. And it's just
Yeah.
a little bit of an interesting distinction, because I think that self-soothing can be a very much needed step in self-care. Like, you have to be
Yeah.
stabilized before you can tackle self-care. Like, you have to be in
Yeah.
that frame of mind, like you were saying. It takes intention and thought. So if what you need to do is soothe yourself, then I mean, that seems like it's part of self-care. It's still part of the
Yeah.
whole package.
Yeah.
And then, like
Yeah.
I was telling you earlier, for me personally, it gets me a little riled up because everything I've seen on the self-soothing list would be activities that were traditionally considered feminine,
Yeah.
taking a
Yeah.
bubble bath, getting your hair cut, getting your
Yeah.
nails done.
Yeah.
And so, on one hand, are men not allowed to engage in self-soothing activities?
Yeah. Mhm.
Or is it that only women need self-soothing activities? What is the
Mhm.
message there?
Yeah.
Maybe
Or is it less than because a woman wants to do
right,
it? Oh, well,
right,
she's got to go
exactly.
do her self-soothing thing. Susie's got to go get her nails done again. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I think, yeah, it'd be nice to add more, whatever we call masculine type things to that list, which I don't even know what that would be at this point. That's how foreign it is to think of it in that
Yes.
way. And one of the articles I read for class yesterday talked about how men, or people who identify as men, are kind of left out of the whole
Absolutely.
self-care.
Absolutely. I agree.
And yeah, and me having men in my life that I love and have these conversations about, like, they're like, what? do that. And I'm like, absolutely, go do that. Go take
Yeah.
care of you. Like, yes, that's a thing. And I don't know, getting on the feminist bandwagon, it makes me wonder if some of this that plays into it is that women have traditionally been seen as the person who does all things. Like, we're the
Yeah.
people nowadays, we definitely go to work, but we also maintain the household and, take care of the smaller things in the house, meaning like pets and children. And, whereas, so if we stop and be like, no, mommy's going to go get her, or, lady of the house is going to go get her nails done, then it's like, whoa. Whereas dudes can like go be like, well, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go play golf or whatever. That's such traditional thinking. I don't even know if that works nowadays,
Yeah, no, it is, it's all interesting, yeah, gender norms and ideas swirling around what's just an activity versus, what's self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. I
It's
don't know.
so individualistic though, because I'm sitting here thinking like, the few times that I get to blow the leaves out of my driveway,
Right.
that is self-care to me. Like, it's a soothing behavior, because I'm like, yes, the leaves are gone. And I have so much with our work, we don't get instant gratification. Or like if I paint one of the walls in my house,
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a pain in the butt, but look at that wall and it's done and I did something, so it's so individualistic as to what it is. And some years I might be like, yeah, I'm going to paint a wall. And some years I'm like, I don't want to paint a wall. That sounds stressful,
Yes,
It really
that's so
depends
true.
what's going on.
Yeah, it's really kind of where your brain is. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I don't even know that I'm looking at it that the correct way, if there is a correct way. But like I said,
Right.
it just caught my interest that like, oh, everything on the self-care list, exercise, going to therapy, eating well, are things that both men and women get told they should do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Every women's health magazine, men's health magazine would tell you the same thing. Whereas
Yeah.
things on the self-soothing list were what you might consider traditionally feminine
Yeah.
activities.
Yeah.
And so they, trivializing these things because they're things that women would traditionally do, and why can't men do those? Like, why did I think
Right.
that way, that way?
Yeah.
So from all different aspects. But yeah. So thanks for noodling through that with me.
Sure.
But we're probably both going to get fired as social work instructors for this video. So,
No, we're just trying our best.
yeah.
Again, individualistic for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
For what you do. That's true. Yeah.
So what do you think about the term guilty pleasure? So have you ever
I have a lot of thoughts about guilt.
Yeah.
I think that people say, oh, I feel guilty about blah, blah. Like an example I can give is my mother is, she is the, so my uncle passed away. He has a daughter who has a disability, pretty significant. And so my mother is in charge of the money to make sure that her niece gets her needs. And she feels guilty. She says to me, I feel guilty that I'm not able to provide these things for my uncle's daughter, that she assumes that her uncle daughter is me. And I said, you don't feel guilty. You didn't purposely go do anything wrong. You weren't like, let me go be evil and take this thing that this person needs.
Right.
I didn't go, hurt them on purpose. I was like, you're sad. You're sad that your brother's not here anymore, and you have this added responsibility, and it's just an injustice that this has to happen in the first place. So I think that we really, when we think of guilt, we really need to mesh through that and say, am I guilty of something, or am I just sad about something? And guilt is where you can reprimand something, where you can go back, you can make amends, you can say you're sorry, you can you can choose not to do that thing again. Whereas most other thing else is just things happen and they're not pleasant. So guilty pleasure. I rarely feel guilty about anything, Karen.
Yeah.
So because I don't intentionally hurt people. Yeah. The majority of the time, especially nowadays. So I just think of it as pleasure.
Good for you.
I mean, I can say that in the past times in my life, I would feel, I don't know if it was guilt, I might feel some type of way about me choosing to go to the gym
Right.
almost every morning and coming in slightly late to work, but I still got my job done. Like we
Yep.
still excelled in the mission that we were supposed to do. And it was more important for me to go work out a little bit to get my head on right than to come into the office with this kind of inner tension or maybe slight anxiety. But I got to go to the gym and I worked it out. So I'm a better person at work now because I did that thing. And I used to feel guilty about it.
Yep.
Now I don't. Now I'm like, and I'm very transparent. I'm like, you don't want me here. I'm better here for you if I've gone and done my self-care before I come into the office. And on days that I need to be here at 8 a.m., I'm here at 8 a.m. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. What was interesting, and the reason why I thought about it is I just binge watched season 2 of Emily in Paris, which is.
Oh, was it good?
No, I mean, no, not really.
It's so dumb.
It's a really
so dumb.
silly show. And
It really is. I love the outfits though.
Oh God. Yeah. They were really bad.
I can see where that's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah. And
like, was that a good use of my time?
Yes, exactly. Like I felt bad watching it, but I couldn't not watch it. And then I was like, why do I feel bad about this? And then I started thinking, I was like, okay, so can I just enjoy this for what it is?
Yeah.
But then should I be feeling bad about the fact that I'm binge watching this with a glass of wine every night? Because that could actually be harmful to my body, and which am I enjoying, the glass of wine or the stupid TV show? So yeah, it's all woven, like you said, with a lot of different emotions. And I don't even know if it was guilt, which was just embarrassment. Like if people asked me what was the most recent show I watched on Netflix, like I would feel really embarrassed saying that it was Emily in Paris.
Well, they need to try Emily in Paris because it's just one of those, like I choose a piece of my self-care is I purposefully do not put myself in front of other people's trauma unless I'm getting paid.
Yeah.
Honestly. I went to I'm so grateful that I was able to go to a retreat in October and listen to some of my favorite authors, their brothers, the Ruiz brothers. They wrote the 4 Agreements. And I got to go to a retreat and listen to them for a weekend. And they talked a lot about our addiction to suffering. And that really hit home to me. And that is where we purposely, watch out, the garbage people.
Those dogs are going to get them, those tiny little dogs.
So where we purposefully expose ourselves to unneeded suffering. And a prime example of that is people who watch the news all the time. So I stopped watching the news a long time ago. I never watched the news as a person, as an adult, but I was exposed to it as a child. Like my parents constantly had it on. And so I had to learn about the murder in Charlotte when that had nothing to do with me. So I stopped watching the news a while ago. I came back from that. The only thing that I used to do for news was listen to NPR app first. At 13 minutes in the morning on the way to work or back, whatever. I love to listen to people talk to me in the morning. And I came back, slipped right into my routine on that Monday after being at that conference. And they were talking about some children and adults who were kidnapped in Haiti and probably dead, missing. Like first thing, that's what I listened to. Oh gosh. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, this is what they're talking about. This is an addiction to suffering. Why the heck am I listening to this? It's got nothing to do with me. I have compassion that these people are going through this. There's literally nothing I can do except send out positive vibes of energy, of peace and harmony. And I do that. I try to do that to the whole world all the time anyway, whether I know what's going on or not. So I stopped listening to NPR at first. I had no idea, Carrie, what's going on. Like I didn't even know Omicron was a thing until, like Jeremy told me about it.
Until I texted you and was like, you should get a COVID test.
What, we got a new variant? And he'll bring up stuff and I'm like, I don't want to hear about that. And he'll bring up stuff. This is my partner. And I'm like, wait a second, does this have anything to do with me or my kids? Like literally, is it Clark County school system? Is it our taxes here in Clark County? Like what's going on? He was like, no. I'm like, well, I don't want to hear about it. And I cut. So think of that as you guys think about your self-care. And addiction to suffering is such a harsh word.
That sounds really hard when you say that. It feels,
yeah, but then I think about it, and then I've noticed it. Like, I just spent time with my parents over the holidays, and I see their addiction, and they're like pessimistic and just pissy. And I'm like, oh, is it time to go home? Because this addiction to suffering is swirling around. Well, let's go see what this thing has happened. I'm like, that has nothing to do with us. Why are we caring about this right now? Or, you know, so-and-so's mom has cancer. I'm like, I don't need to know about so-and-so's mom has cancer. I haven't seen so-and-so in 40 years. You know, so it's just stuff like that. It's just what you purposefully expose yourself to is really important, because if you're going to be a social worker, working at the cottage, you're going to purposefully expose yourself to child abuse and sexual assault. So why the hell would you let this other stuff that you don't get paid to do come be in your sphere of influence at all? Because it's going to impact your relationships with people you love. And that's the most important relationships that you have, and your relationship you have with yourself, because you're going to be thinking about those poor people in Haiti that there's nothing you can do about on your drive into work. And then that carries into what the people you're going to be with that day, you know, what you're going to think about. You'll be a little depressed, but poor people in Haiti, you know what I'm saying? Like, I just cut it out.
Oh, I feel like I'm not quite as evolved as you yet, Sally, because like
you'll get there. You're about 10 years younger than me. So
it feels, I mean, I agree with you. I can't do anything, but I still feel like I should
don't need to know.
I still like I should feel like I should be informed. Like, I'm still at the point where I feel like I should be aware.
Try it.
I should be informed. Yeah.
Just try it. Just try it for a week. Now, we have not had an election cycle yet.
Oh yeah.
That's the thing where I get way involved in politics when it's time to elect a president.
Yeah.
And that is where I can lose my mind. I mean, and we just had this year where, like, COVID, bam, 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 we're all going to die. We're not going to die.
Yeah.
No, don't touch anybody. Don't touch anything. Go wash your food at the grocery store.
Yes.
You know, like,
it's been a lot.
And then, so we've had too much. So I just cut it off, and it's blissful. So maybe try it for like a week.
Yeah. It's not a bad idea.
Yeah. Anyway.
So I guess we could get towards where we're wrapping this up. What would be your advice for these students? They're probably, I don't have the syllabus in front of me, but I'm guessing they're in week 2 of their internship. So if you guys are watching this in a different week, don't worry about it. I can't remember what week this will be. We're recording this Christmas. So week 2 of their second semester of their first year placement. And this is when they're spending more time at their site. They were there 1 day a week last semester. They're there 2 days a week this semester. What would you recommend in terms of paying attention for signs of burnout, and making sure they're taking care of themselves this semester?
To wrap up. Burnout, to me, I think that there's an evolution, this is my personal opinion. I think there's an evolution as a social worker to build up a thick skin. And you absolutely need that. You can't cry every time you hear about a kid that's been sexually abused, because if you do, you are not in the right job. Go work somewhere else. Go work with the elderly, substance abuse, whatever. Go run a nonprofit, something else. So if you're at the space, if you're at your internship and it is impacting you outside of work for longer than 12 hours, then this may not be the thing for you. And that is totally okay. I could not teach kids. I have so much compassion for teachers, because I can't have ongoing relationships with children. They irritate the heck out of me. So, like, everybody's got their thing, thank God, because that way we're filling all the roles that need to be filled. So be thoughtful of that. So really be intentional about, am I feeling this? I think that interns who are in their second semester now, they're just doing 2 days. It'd be a little early for burnout. I think that that's something that you probably are in a couple years in your job. And you just, hopefully you have had a really good pulse on who you are, and you can feel it. Where I have seen like I've experienced burnout, and that's where I should be applying for a grant and I don't care. You know, it's like where I've had staff people that should be replying to an email, should be responding to some, and they just did not. And it's where it's a noticeable change. Like, there's people who are slackers and they just don't do the job, but then there's people who are really good at the job and all of a sudden they're not. That is a sign of burnout, and it's not going to be fixed with a vacation. It's going to be fixed. Like, a vacation is great,
Yeah.
A vacation may give you space to implement permanent change in your life to help take care of yourself. But it's something that it's going to still be there when you come back from the vacation if you don't make permanent changes without professional self-care to make sure things are set up to help you do your job the best you can. Or you might need to change your job, change aspects of your job. I don't know. And then also make sure that personal self-care is there as well, so you'll have longevity. I think for my advice to people who are entering the field of social work is protect yourself, protect your home, not meaning like your physical home, but like what you come home to. Protect your environment, your personal environment, protect your mental well-being with the veracity of an army. I mean that, and you are the only person who can do that for yourself. So you protect yourself, and that means you do not let toxicity in, because toxicity is going to naturally come in through the job. And you literally, like I always reframe things, am I getting paid for this? Like, am I getting paid to listen to this right now? You know, like, and if I'm getting paid for it and I'm feeling supported and appreciated and it is in my job description, then that is what I should be doing. But there's some bull mess going on that this is not my job. I'm like, not my job. You need to go talk to somebody else. You need to figure out something. I would give you a referral. I will. This is not what I do.
Unless it's just, something you're interested in which case you're like, yes, tell me more.
Yeah. But like, you have got to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that social workers are naturally empathetic. And so therefore they're even more susceptible to burnout, vicarious trauma, things like that, because we are caring individuals and we went into this field because we want to help people, which is great. But if you want to help people, you better help yourself first. Yeah. And that is to make sure to protect yourself and what you let in with the same way that you would protect someone you really, 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 really love. So
yeah. No, I think that is a great message to end this on. And then I'm going to give the disclaimer at the end. I probably should have given it at the beginning. This is just a coffee chat with Carrie and Sally. We do not reflect the views of the School of Social Work in any way. And we don't get it right all the time. So what you just heard was us just having a conversation and bouncing ideas off each other. And I hope it was interesting for you all. You'll get the chance to post some questions on the discussion board. And of course, reach out if there's anything you want to talk about further. So thank you, Sally, for spending some time with us today. So
yeah, my pleasure.
All right.